Hi, everyone. There's something very strange about tomorrow. Tomorrow's always going to be better. Tomorrow I'll exercise. Tomorrow I'll finally make that phone call. Tomorrow I'll be more patient with the kids. Tomorrow I'll start learning that sefer. Tomorrow I'll daven with more kavana. Tomorrow I'll finally get serious about whatever it is that I know I should be doing. Tomorrow's wonderful. Tomorrow is when we imagine becoming the person we want to be. The problem with tomorrow is that tomorrow has a habit of becoming today. And when it does, suddenly things get complicated. Today is traffic. Today is emails. Today is fatigue. Today is children who aren't cooperating, a boss who's demanding, a spouse who's distracted, a headache, a deadline, 1,000 notifications on the phone. Tomorrow is the day that I will become the best version of myself. Today is the day I actually have to do it. And perhaps that's why a seemingly unnecessary word in this week's Parsha deserves our attention. Indeed, the Torah tells us, Hayom hazeh, Hashem Elokecha mitzavcha la'asos, as hachukim ha'ele v'as hamishpatim. Hayom hazeh, today, Hashem, your God, commands you to perform these statutes and laws. Today, Moshe Rabbeinu has been teaching Klal Yisrael the mitzvos for over 40 years. The Torah has been given already. They already know what they're supposed to do. So what does Moshe say Hayom Hazeh today? Rashi quotes Chazal and gives us an extraordinary answer. Bechol Yom, each and every day, Yiyu be'einecha kechadashim, ke'ilu bo bayom nitztavesa aleihem. Every day they should be new in your eyes, as though you were commanded them on that very day. But what does that mean? How can something be new when it isn't new? If I put on tefillin thousands of times, how can today's tefillin be new? If I've said Shemona Esrei thousands of times, how can today's Shemona Esrei be new? If I make Kiddush every Friday night for decades, how can this week's Kiddush be new? If I've learned that same Mishnah, that same Gemara, that same Parsha over and over and over again, how can the same words, suddenly be new? And notice something very important about what Rashi says. He doesn't say B'chol yom yu kechadashim, every day they should be new. He says Yiyu be'einecha kechadashim, they should be new in your eyes. The Torah isn't necessarily asking us to change what we're doing. It's asking us to change the way we're seeing what we're doing. And perhaps that's because the mitzvah doesn't have to be new. I do, and I am. Yesterday I was a different person. Yesterday I had different thoughts, different worries, different experiences, different failures, different things I understood, different things I was grateful for, different things happened in my relationship. And today, even if nothing externally has changed, I'm not exactly the same person. So when I stand before Hashem today and say the same words I said yesterday, something has changed. I'm saying them, but today. And that means something almost paradoxical. I've never actually done this before. Yeah, I've never put on these tefillin as the person that I am today. I've never said the Shemona Esrei with today's thoughts, today's struggles, today's gratitude, today's distractions. I've never sat across from my spouse as the person I am today. I've never been a parent to this child on this particular day. I've never experienced this Shabbos before. I've never lived today before. And that's enough to make an encounter brand new. You see, there's a fascinating problem with familiarity. We tend to assume that the opposite of unfamiliar is familiar. But familiarity doesn't simply make something comfortable. Sometimes familiarity makes us stop seeing it. Think about driving the same route every day. You can drive down the same street hundreds of times and have no idea what stores are there. And then one day somebody points something out. Did you ever notice that building? And suddenly you see it. It was always there. You simply weren't noticing it anymore. Psychologists have a name for part of this phenomenon, habituation. You see, when something becomes familiar, our brains don't need to give it the same attention that they once did. And that's actually a wonderful thing. In my clinical work, for example, Habituation can be part of helping people with anxiety. A person can learn through repeated exposure that a thought or a sensation that once felt dangerous is not actually dangerous. The brain learns, I've been here before. I don't need to react as though this is an emergency. But there's another side to habituation. You see, sometimes the danger isn't that something is frightening. Sometimes the danger is that something beautiful has become invisible. And that can happen in our spiritual lives. We don't necessarily have to stop believing. We don't necessarily stop caring. We actually just simply stop seeing. We put on tefillin, but we don't stop to think about what it means that we're binding ourselves to Hashem. We walk into shul and immediately start thinking about what happened at work or what we still need to do over there at work. We say a bracha before eating and our mind's already on the food. We sit across from our spouse and listen while we're composing the answer in our head. We hear our child tell us something and we're already thinking about the next thing we need to do. Nothing is necessarily wrong with the actions. We've simply become so familiar with them that we no longer fully see them. And perhaps that's the deeper meaning of B'chol Yom Yu Beinecha Kechadashim. Every day, see them as new. Not because you have to convince yourself that you've never done this before, but because you have to recognize, I've never done this before. The mitzvah hasn't changed, the encounter can. A marriage doesn't need a new spouse every day. It needs us to notice the spouse we have today. A parent doesn't need a new child. A parent needs to notice the child standing in front of him today. We don't need a new sitter. We need to open the sitter with the person we've become today. We don't need a new Torah. We need to encounter the Torah with the eyes of today's person. The world around us may look exactly the same, but we aren't exactly the same. And that means the possibility of a new encounter is always there. And perhaps that's why the Torah emphasizes Hayom Hazeh, today. We tend to think of today as the midpoint between yesterday and tomorrow. Yesterday is what happened, tomorrow is what will happen, and today is just simply the transition between the two. But from the perspective of the Torah, today's not a transition. Today is where we can choose. Yesterday is already written, tomorrow hasn't been written yet, but today is where we can notice. Today's where we can respond differently. Today's where we can do something we didn't do yesterday. Today's where Torah happens. It doesn't mean we need to manufacture excitement. It doesn't mean that every tefillah has to be spiritually transcendent. It doesn't mean that every Shabbos has to feel like the first Shabbos of our lives. It means something much simpler. And what is that? Don't let familiarity prevent you from recognizing what's actually happening. You're standing in front of Hashem today. You're saying the words today. You're having another opportunity to speak differently to someone you love today. You have another chance to do something you didn't do yesterday, today. You have another chance to begin something that you've been postponing today. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu says Hayom Hazeh, this particular day. The day you woke up tired, the day you got good news, the day you got disappointing news, the day your child made you proud, the day your child frustrated you, the day you feel spiritually inspired, the day you don't. This day. Hashem doesn't wait for some ideal version of you to arrive. He meets you in the version of you who woke up this morning. And perhaps this is particularly important as we approach the Yamim Noraim. You know, we all think of tshuva as in two directions. We look backward and we ask, what did I do wrong? And then we look forward and ask, who do I want to become? And both questions are important. But perhaps the Torah is reminding us of a third direction. Look at what's in front of you, Hayom Hazeh, today. Because tshuva isn't only about regretting yesterday, and isn't only about planning tomorrow. Tshuva begins when I finally see today clearly. The person who wants to become more patient next year gets one opportunity today to pause before reacting. The person who wants to become more connected to Hashem gets one opportunity today to pay attention during one bracha. The person who wants to improve a relationship gets one opportunity today to really listen. The person who wants to become a better Jew gets one opportunity today to do one mitzvah with a little more awareness. We sometimes imagine that change requires a dramatic decision, but very often change begins with something much smaller. It begins with seeing today differently. And perhaps there's one small practice we can take from this. Choose one thing you do every day, something completely ordinary, maybe moda'ani, maybe the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, maybe saying good morning to your spouse or your friend, maybe greeting your children when they come home, maybe one bracha before eating, and for 1 week before doing it, pause for 5 seconds and think hayom, not yesterday, not tomorrow, today. What does this moment mean today? What do I want to notice that I normally don't notice? What would it mean to do this one thing as though I've never done it before? We may discover that we don't actually need more novelty. We need more attention. The world's constantly telling us to move on. Yesterday's news is old. Today's news is already being replaced by tomorrow's. The next message, the next email, the next appointment, the next accomplishment, the next stage. And while we're busy preparing for what comes next, something very precious can quietly disappear. This, this conversation, this person, this tefillah, this mitzvah, this day, hayom hazeh, this one. Rashi doesn't tell us that every day has to be different. He tells us that every day has to be new in our eyes. Because the goal isn't to wake up every morning and find a new life. The goal is to wake up every morning and see the life we already have with new eyes. Yesterday is already written, tomorrow isn't here yet, but today has been placed before us. And perhaps this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was telling Klal Yisrael, and what the Torah is telling us. Don't wait for tomorrow to become the person you want to be. See who you are today, because tomorrow may be when we imagine that life begins. But Hayom Hazeh, today, is where life actually happens. Wishing you and yours a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat Shalom to all.